Russian forces are set to continue their offensive in eastern Ukraine after claiming victory in Lysychansk on Sunday. Ukraine's military withdrew from the strategically important city, meaning the Luhansk region is now entirely under Russian control. Ukraine is now braced for further attacks against the city of Slovyansk as Russian forces continue to push westwards. Russia is expected to attempt to take control of Donetsk. That, along with Luhansk, makes up the wider Donbas region. Ukraine's President Zelensky says his country will recover the lost territory. Now, Yuri Sak is an advisor to the Ukrainian defense minister. I asked him about the significance of the loss of Lysychansk.
For Ukraine and for Ukrainian armed forces, temporary loss of any city, no matter how big or small, a temporary loss of every meter of our territory is significant. And this is why every time when we have to temporarily leave certain areas or certain cities, we insist that we will be back. And our president says that the Ukrainian armed forces are committed to deoccupy all the temporarily occupied territories. But of course, Lysychansk is, the last large city in Luhansk Oblast. But what has to be noted is that today, Ukrainian armed forces are still in Luhansk region. So even though it is a very small part of Luhansk region, but according to the reports of the local authorities, Ukrainian armed forces are still there on a small part of land.
Right. And this, of course, comes with the loss of Mariupol and significant swathes of eastern Ukraine. Is this war moving Russia's way?
We don't believe this war is moving Russia's way because there are other areas of Ukraine which are temporarily occupied by these war criminals, where Ukrainian armed forces are actually gaining ground and retaking certain areas. This is the south of Ukraine, the Kherson region. This is the area around Kyiv, the second largest city in Ukraine. So this is a war. It's a very dynamic war. And of course, in those areas where Russians have focused and concentrated all of their firepower, firing tens of thousands of artillery shells a day. Of course, it makes sense for Ukrainian armed forces because we value human life to retreat temporarily. But in other areas, we are already counterattacking, and providing we receive more heavy weaponry soon, we will be able to do it even more efficiently.
I think you bring us on to my next question, which was you talk about these losses as being temporary. How do you reverse them?
You reverse them by receiving sufficient number of heavy artillery, multi-launch rocket systems, tanks, aircraft, air defense systems, anti-rocket systems, everything that our international partners have committed to provide us with, and you do it militarily.
So you've been singing the same song, if I can put it that way, for some months now, that bring us more heavy weaponry, and this despite promises from the likes of the United States, the United Kingdom and Germany to do just that. Are they just not arriving quick enough for you?
Some of the heavy weaponry that we have been promised by the United States, by Germany, by the UK, has already arrived in Ukraine and is efficiently being used on the front lines. And we are very grateful to our international partners, all of those who have gathered at Ramstein, at NATO summit recently, and they have committed themselves wholeheartedly to support Ukraine militarily for as long as it takes. But of course, us and on the battlefield, we understand that we need more heavy weaponry and we need it faster. And we hope that our partners will find ways to deliver us this vital military assistance sooner rather than later.
And so now, as Russia secures its hold on the east of Ukraine, where do you expect it to turn its firepower next? What do you expect its next target to be?
Well, first of all, Russia has not yet established its hold on the east of Ukraine because there's still Donetsk region, and there are cities such as Slovyansk. They've been mentioned in your report earlier. There is a city of Kramatorsk, and there are very capable, highly motivated and professional Ukrainian armed forces which are located there, and they will continue resistance. And actually, these cities, the Slovyansk and Kramatorsk, are most likely to be the next major objective, military objective of the Russian aggressor. But the key overarching military objective of the aggressor has always been to encircle Ukrainian armed forces in the east of Ukraine and destroy them. And this has not happened. This has not happened because even from Lysychansk, Ukrainian armed forces have been able to retreat without losses. So from that perspective, we understand where the next target will be, but we also understand that we are doing everything we can in terms of tactics and maneuvers to ensure that we incur as much losses on our enemy as possible, and at the same time, we sustain as fewer losses as possible.
Right, so clearly from the Ukrainian side, this ain't over yet. Yuri Sak, advisor to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says rebuilding the country will be a colossal job. So let's take a closer look at the scale of the damage done so far. More than 100 hospitals have been destroyed. Damage to civilian infrastructure is running at more than an estimated €4.5 billion per week. Now, thousands of kilometres of roads have been wrecked and hundreds of bridges blown up. Ukrainian officials put total economic losses from this war at more than €500 billion. Ukrainian officials and international leaders have begun a two-day conference in the Swiss city of Lugano to come up with a plan to fund Ukraine's reconstruction after Russia's devastating war. Timothy Milovanov is an economic advisor to President Volodymyr Zelensky. He's a former Ukrainian economy minister and is also president of the Kyiv School of Economics. He joins us from those reconstruction talks. Welcome to DW. What does Ukraine hope to get from these talks?
One, something actionable, a platform or a mechanism of coordination of all activities and aid around Ukraine, something which will streamline the process. B, a sense of urgency in the minds of people that funding is needed. And the C is a number, a common knowledge number, an agreed upon number of how much funds are needed and for what purposes.
OK, so and as I understand it, the plan for today's meeting is not to actually raise those funds, but to effectively look at how they would be used, how Ukraine would be rebuilt.
That is correct. There is overall understanding that funds are needed, and the partners are very sympathetic. There are a lot of questions about the priorities, mechanisms, architecture, transparency, governance, corruption. All those issues have to be addressed, and they have to be addressed now. And this is what the conference is about. And
many would look at this and say, well, isn't it too soon to be talking about reconstruction while bombs are still dropping, while a war is still raging?
That's exactly one of the questions which was discussed today heads on, Isn't it too early? Let's wait until after the war. And the government comes forward with two different approaches or two different numbers. One is what's needed now to maintain the economy, and they call it rapid recovery. And the number is about $65 billion. And that includes hospitals, schools, bridges, which need to be recovered now for the economy to continue to operate. And then there is a number of what happens after the war.
Right. And we'll continue to focus on after the war, because there's an intriguing question here, which is, well, doesn't it rather depend on who wins and what a win looks like? Because, to put it simply, is this plan likely to happen? Are the funds likely to flow if Russia is in charge of Ukraine?
Absolutely. This is the question. All of this is predicated on victory, and a number of speakers today at the conference made it crystal clear that we need to support Ukraine now, both financially in terms of weapons, so that the reconstruction, A, is cheaper, B, makes sense at all. Of course, if weapons are not forthcoming, we might be in a situation there's not much to recover, right? So you're absolutely correct.
Right. So the funds and the plan, that depends on, presumably then, just looking at what victory might look like, would that depend on Russia giving up territory that it has taken?
Well, Russia is not going to give up anything, so it has to be taken away from Russia. Or there should be, there are essentially a couple of outcomes one can think of. One is Ukraine will be able, with help of international partners and friends, to recover territories, or Ukraine won't be able immediately to recover these territories, but some will be, and the front lines will stabilize somewhere. And this was a discussion too. What happens if the front lines stabilize for a while and the war becomes protracted, prolonged? How should we go about this? And so there are multiple scenarios.
You mentioned corruption was one of the things that will come up at this conference, because, of course, before Russia invaded, there were widespread concerns about corruption in Ukraine. Reconstruction is going to mean billions and billions of euros are flowing into and out of the country. Do you accept that there will be continuing concern amongst potential creditors and investors about where and how this money is accounted for?
There are two concerns. One is corruption within Ukraine, and the second concern is lobbyism and getting preferred contractors, which are politically connected to different donors. The first concern undermines the transparency and trust into the effort, and the second concern just makes the reconstruction effort very, very expensive. So both have to be addressed, and for that there have been multiple proposals what kind of governance mechanisms can address them. The important aspect is to understand that these issues are concentrated in the area of procurement, first of all. So making procurement very clear, very specific, very transparent will help. And will go a long way.
Thank you so much for outlining that so clearly. Timothy Milivanov, economic advisor to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. Thank you.